Japan is a fantastic place for a family vacation. It's safe, child-friendly, and full of incredible things to see and do, as well as eat. Whether you want the hustle and bustle of the big cities, or you're keen to explore a quieter, more traditional side of the country, there really is something for everyone, kids and adults alike. About the only thing that's going to prevent you from having the best holiday ever is running into things that aren't so intuitive or that simply operate very differently in Japan. And that's what this video is all about. I'm going to give you a stack of tips and advice to help you make the most of your trip. I've broken it all up into the broad categories of transport, accommodation, food and activities, so if you want to get to a specific section, just use the chapter select. For those that already followed the channel, yes, this is a compilation of the previous Taking Kids to Japan videos, but with some extra updates, so consider this the ultimate guide. Time to get into it. Let's start with an obvious question. When is the best time to come to Japan? Well, it depends on what you want to do, obviously, but I'd definitely avoid bringing kids to Japan in summer. Summer, particularly in the big cities, is brutally hot and humid and will make everything you do more of a chore than it needs to be. Spring and autumn, on the other hand, are ideal times to visit. The weather is far more moderate and you can tap into other attractions such as cherry blossom season and the fall leaves. If you're looking to take the family skiing, you can brave the winter cold or potentially look at coming at the start of spring as the season extends into March and even beyond. Most people coming to Japan for the first time fly into Tokyo, so here's one tip if that's what you're going to do. If at all possible, try and land at Haneda Airport as opposed to Narita. Haneda is much closer to the city and much more convenient. Once you've landed, one of the first things you should do is get IC cards for every member of the family that needs to pay for public transport. IC cards make getting around heaps easier and are one of the most essential things to have in Japan in general. There are tons of different brands that are functionally the same and work throughout the country, such as Suica, Pasmo and Icoca. You put money on these cards and you can then use them to tap your way through almost all public transport. This option is obviously much more convenient than buying tickets for trains or dealing with change on buses. IC cards are also widely supported elsewhere. You can use them on many vending machines, in convenience stores, and in plenty of restaurants and shops too. Topping them up is as simple as using a ticket machine at a train station or visiting a konbini. I'd highly recommend getting adult and child IC cards for everyone in your family that needs to pay for public transport, as it just makes life so much simpler. That said, if you're flying into Tokyo, your options, as of publishing this video at least, are limited. Since August 2023, sales of most Suica and Pasmo cards in Japan have been suspended due to chip shortages. There are ways around this, however. You should still be able to get both the Welcome Suica card and the Pasmo passport. These are special tourist cards that expire after 28 days, so you need to ensure you spend the balance on the card before you leave. As of April 2024, you can get Welcome Suicas from select counters and vending machines at Haneda Airport, and you can buy regular Suicas from JR East travel service centres at Narita Airport, as well as at major train stations throughout Tokyo. Pasmo passports are available at both Haneda and Narita airports, and can also be purchased at various train stations throughout the city. If you're buying physical cards, you'll need cash to top them up, whether you're doing so at a train station or a konbini.
Shut up and take my money!
If you have an iPhone, it's actually a simple matter to get a virtual Suica or Pasmo card. But if you need to get ICs for your kids, you're still going to have to find physical cards anyway. It's also worth pointing out that I still need to top up my virtual Suica at convenience stores using cash, as I can't actually add to the balance with any of my credit cards. Just so you know, this is an ongoing issue with foreign Visa cards. I've never had any problems using my cards in Japan, but doing things like topping up my Suica through the app or buying Disneyland tickets through the official online site simply haven't worked. To date, it's just Suica and Pasmo sales that have been suspended, so if you're flying into somewhere other than Tokyo, there will be a different regional card available, and this will also work all over Japan. In Osaka, for instance, you should still be able to pick up an Icoca card. With that out of the way, let's run through the many options for getting around. If you're moving around within a city, you'll soon discover that the public transport is pretty incredible. Whether you're on the JR lines or using one of the subway services, in the big cities it's rare to wait more than a few minutes for a train, making getting from one place in a city to another super efficient. It also helps that stations have plenty of English signage, and this extends onto the trains themselves, which usually have English language station info and announcements.
The rapid train bound for Tokyo. will soon arrive on track number 1.
And now that we all have supercomputers and internet access in our pockets, the once daunting task of actually navigating the many train lines in a megalopolis like Tokyo has suddenly become a whole lot easier. I personally use Google Maps for 99% of all my travel planning and travel execution in Japan. The app lets me set a bunch of parameters such as departure time or arrival time, and any route I select factors in walking time and generally has platform numbers as well as which exit to take when leaving a station. You can suss all this stuff out in advance too, so when you're planning each day's itinerary at home, you can get a sense of how easy or hard it is to get from place to place. And then when you're there, you can lean into it pretty heavily. If Google Maps says the train you want is leaving at 2:34 from platform 25, and there's a train listed at that time on that platform, I'll generally just hop on and it almost always works out. Like I said, Japan's trains are reliable and crazy efficient. Even so, Google Maps isn't perfect, and I've certainly found it's given me inaccurate information from time to time, particularly when it comes to buses and train travel in more out-of-the-way places. I typically try to cross-check that kind of stuff either at tourist information centres or by asking at bus stops and train stations. It's also important to know what the different grades of trains mean, as there are local, rapid, express, and special rapid services. I've listed these in order of efficiency, so a local train will stop at every station, whereas special rapid trains will only stop at major stations and are the fastest option without needing an extra ticket. An extra ticket, you say? Yes, if your route for the day includes a Shinkansen or a limited express train, you can't simply tap your way onto these with an IC card. Both require an additional ticket to be purchased, whether that's for a reserved seat or to simply sit in an unreserved section. Purchasing that extra ticket for your family is simple enough, but you'll need to bear it in mind when planning your travel itinerary. Google Maps, for instance, doesn't factor in the time that may be required. For the Shinkansen, you'll either want to book your seats online ahead of time or allow plenty of extra time. Not only will you most likely have to queue for tickets, but some routes sell out early so you can easily wind up on a later train. More on bullet trains in a bit. For limited express trains, our experience has been that it's best to try and arrive a little early to buy the tickets if at all possible.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking the Koya Limited Express today. We will soon arrive at Namba.
Google's walking directions also aren't always as efficient or easy to understand as they could be, particularly when navigating dense urban environments like Osaka and Tokyo. Japanese cities tend to have a lot of levels, Jerry.
Levels.
So the best way to get somewhere might be along one of the extensive underground walkways connecting different subway stations or up along an overpass. You need to pay particular attention to floor numbers too, as big stations, shopping complexes, and entertainment districts tend to have a lot of verticality. Google Maps will certainly point you in the right direction, but the optimal route may not be obvious. Coming back to the trains, one thing you should bear in mind is that even as efficient as they are, they still get stretched to capacity at times. The trains can get insanely busy during peak hour in the big cities, and the only thing worse than being crammed into a carriage with 100 other people on your own is doing that with kids. It's worth trying to avoid peak hour travel during the week if you can. A city like Tokyo doesn't really get started until 10 AM anyway. Shops tend to open late and stay open late, so dodging the morning rush between about 7 and 9 AM isn't too hard. The 5 PM to 7 PM surge can be a bit trickier though. Another thing to know about travelling by train in the big cities is you'll generally have to switch lines a lot. This can be a major hassle with kids, as it means lots of stairs and lots of walking between, say, the JR exit and the subway entrance, or vice versa. Google Maps will typically give you a few different options for getting from place to place, so you can try and pick the most straightforward route. There are even checkboxes you can select for fewest transfers and least walking, which can be invaluable. And in general, when travelling with kids, always try and allow extra time, particularly when you've got transfers to make. You should also be aware that Google Maps doesn't do a great job of highlighting the different rail operators and what's going to be involved when you're changing stations versus lines. In this travel schedule, for instance, you're transferring from Shinjuku Station to Shinjuku Station, but there's no indication that these are two separate Shinjuku stations that are actually a reasonable walk and many escalators apart. On top of that, the app pretty much assumes that when you get off the Oedo subway line, you'll know you need to follow the signs to the JR Shinjuku station, which is quite an assumption if you haven't spent much time in Tokyo already. The somewhat annoying solution is to try and get your head around which rail operators you're using ahead of time or while in transit, so you've sussed that, in this example, the Chuo line leaves from the JR station and then you'll know where you're heading. I've also found that Google Maps resets itself periodically, which can be pretty annoying when you're mid-journey and then have to reconstruct the itinerary that you'd mapped out and were actively following. There's a system for pinning your planned route, but it's not very intuitive, so I tend to screen cap my plan so I have a record of it and just go through the process of putting it back together as and when necessary. Technology, eh? Oh, and when you're leaving the station, pay attention to the exit Google Maps tells you to take. Some stations have dozens of exits, and getting back to street level in the most convenient spot to reach your destination will save you a heap of time, and a whole lot of grumbling from your kids. If your map app of choice doesn't give you an exit, look at where you need to go in relation to the station and pick the most likely option. One thing to keep in mind, if you look at a map in a station, they're almost never orientated with north at the top, so orient yourself towards north before you decide which exit you should head towards. Trains almost always have priority seats reserved for the elderly, pregnant women, families with young kids, and so on, so look out for those and hopefully at least your kids will be able to sit down some of the time. Stations generally have elevators to and from the platforms too, so if you have a stroller or bags, they can be helpful. Just bear in mind that you often have to go out of your way to find them, so yep, more walking. As far as train fares go, if your kids are 12 or older, they pay the adult fare. If they're 6 to 11, they pay a kids fare, which is 50% the adult fare. Kids aged between 1 and 5 travel for free. At least they do if there are enough adults accompanying them. The rule, apparently, is 2 children per adult. So if you have 2 adults somehow travelling with 5 kids aged between 1 and 5, good luck with that by the way, you'd have to pay a kids fare for the 5th kid. Infants that are less than 1 year old travel for free and I assume aren't included in the rule I just mentioned. One last thing to note. Say you're travelling on the Shinkansen and want to get reserved seats. If a child aged 5 or under is going to use a reserved seat, they're meant to pay the child's fare. Otherwise, they're fine to sit in your lap or you can go in an unreserved car where they're okay to have their own seat if available. Fares for buses follow similar rules to trains, while highway buses also generally offer cheaper fares for children. If you're renting a car, meanwhile, children under 6 must be in a child seat or booster seat in the rear of the car. Inquire in advance to make sure enough kid seats are available before you rent the car. Taxis, meanwhile, are exempt, so just make sure your kids buckle up or sit on your lap or are in a sling. Highway buses are a cheap option for getting around, but really the least painful way to move between major destinations in Japan when travelling with kids is by express trains, bullet trains, and regional flights. If you want to go from Tokyo to Osaka, for instance, there are bullet trains leaving literally every few minutes. You don't need to queue for a counter to buy Shinkansen tickets either, as the ticket machines have an English language option. You do need to get a ticket, however, as you can't tap your way onto the Shinkansen with an IC card. Each train has reserved and non-reserved carriages, with seats in the former costing slightly more. Since you're travelling with kids, I'd recommend trying to get reserved seats so you know you'll all have assigned seats and will hopefully be together. That said, you can consider using the non-reserved carriages if you know you're getting on the train at its first stop, as you can queue up and nab your seats out of the gate. It's also possible to book Shinkansen tickets online or through an app, but I've always just rocked up when I want to travel and bought them on the spot. Getting tickets ahead of time is worth considering, however, if you know you're going to be travelling on a particularly busy day or you just want to have everything sorted in advance. Sites like Klook are an option, but if you can, I'd go through the official channels. For JR West, for instance, that's SmartEX, which also has an app, and for JR East, it's Ekinet. I haven't tried using the latter, but I can sadly confirm that SmartEX generally doesn't like foreign visa cards. I tried using 2 different cards during the registration process and got nowhere. Shame, because you can actually save a decent amount of money by booking your tickets more than 28 days out. If you've got a MasterCard or Amex, incidentally, you should be fine. Another thing to bear in mind is that there are express Shinkansen and there are those that make many more stops. The fastest you can get from Hiroshima to Osaka, for instance, is 1 hour and 20 minutes via the Nozomi, whereas the Kodama takes more than 2 hours and 45 minutes. If you buy your tickets from a JR counter, the staff will always put you on the fastest option. JR counter staff typically speak good English too. Using the machines is straightforward and often significantly faster, but just make sure you get a basic fare ticket in addition to your seat ticket. You need them both, and you actually put them through the ticket gate at the same time. The Shinkansen are great, but they're not cheap, and they're not always the fastest option depending on where you're heading. If you want to go from, say, Tokyo to Fukuoka, a regional flight may well be both the quickest and cheapest option. Many flights within Japan are very competitively priced, and JAL even has a Japan Explorer Pass that foreigners can take advantage of for flat fare pricing. JR passes used to be the way to go if you wanted to travel around Japan, but since the huge price hike in late 2023, they're no longer even vaguely reasonable value. So in addition to domestic flights, I'd look into regional travel passes as well. There are a heap of them, and if one fits your itinerary, it may save you money and hassle. Before we move on to the next topic, here are 10 more things to know when it comes to traveling in Japan.
なんで?
Make sure you have data while you're there. I can't stress enough how utterly essential this is. Sure, there's free Wi-Fi in some shops, public spaces, and at your accommodation, but being able to quickly look up transport or an address in Google Maps, or to translate a menu in a restaurant without any hassle, will make your life a lot easier. It's not that expensive anymore either. You can either get a Japanese SIM, add an eSIM to your mobile, or activate your existing provider's roaming plan if it's good value. Alternatively, you can rent a Wi-Fi unit, as that can be shared across multiple devices. That's probably the worst of the options, however, as it introduces the headache of managing the battery life on an additional device, plus it also becomes a problem if you split up. Oh, and if you're planning on using Google Translate, download the Japanese database before you go, because it's always when you need it most that your data drops out. Unless you're well outside a big population centre, there are konbinis, aka convenience stores, everywhere in Japan, and they're fantastic. They're also the most straightforward places to get cash out. The big names like Family Mart and 7-Eleven all have ATMs, and international cards are widely accepted. While Japan is less of a cash society than it once was, you'll still need cash for smaller establishments. I've also found the further you go from the big cities, the less cards are accepted. Speaking of cards, the best way to avoid currency conversion fees is to pay in yen. I use a Wise Visa card whenever I'm in Japan, as it lets me pay from a stockpile of yen without any fees. Another option to consider is Revolut. It's a good idea to carry a hand towel or two with you, as, bizarrely, a lot of Japanese public restrooms don't have paper towels or hand dryers. Hand towels can also be good to wipe the sweat off if you're travelling in summer. Of course, as I said at the start, my advice is don't take kids to Japan in summer if you can help it. Consider whether you can make do without a stroller and just take a baby carrier instead. Strollers can be pretty cumbersome in busy Japanese cities. Mind you, so can carrying a kid that's a little too big for a carrier. If you do have a stroller, try to avoid trips where you're changing trains and stations a bunch of times. Finding a central spot to stay and then refining your itinerary in advance goes a long way here. Enormous suitcases are a bad idea in Japan in general. I've stayed in hotels where I could barely fit a modest-sized suitcase on the floor. They're also a pain on trains and buses. The overhead storage on the Shinkansen can actually fit reasonably large suitcases, but if your luggage is too big, you'll need to actually book a spot for it at the end of the carriage or in the luggage storage between carriages, which is an extra hassle. That said, you can always use luggage forwarding services if you really don't want to deal with lugging luggage. Changing facilities for babies are pretty widely available in major cities, so if you're in need of them, department stores are your friend. Not only will they have changing tables, but private areas for breastfeeding, as well as microwaves, formula makers, high chairs, and vending machines with juice, baby wipes, and diapers. Shopping malls also have changing rooms, as do many larger train stations. Not sure where the nearest changing room is? Try this app out, as it can tell you where the nearest one is located. I'll include links in the description. Buses are pretty straightforward in the major cities. They'll generally accept IC cards, so whether you get on at the front door or back door, and whether it's a flat fare or the cost changes depending on how far you go, you can just tap your way through it. Outside major cities, on the other hand, buses can be a lot more old school. You'll typically get on at the back door, and if there's no IC card reader, you'll need to grab a ticket from the machine. Knowing how much to pay when you get off is a simple matter of looking at the number on your ticket and finding its price on the display grid at the front of the bus. The machine next to the driver can change 1,000 yen notes too, so don't stress if you don't have the right change. Public transport also gets a lot more haphazard outside the big cities. You can go from a world where there's a train every 4 minutes to having to organise your travel around a bus service that only goes 4 times a day. I always suss out my options well ahead of time. Finally, ask for help if you need directions or anything else. Japanese people are typically very accommodating and will bend over backwards to help if they can. And that's it for transport and getting around. Let's move on to my guide to accommodation, in which we'll cover what your accommodation options in Japan actually are and how you should go about choosing where to stay. The first thing to consider is how straightforward it will be to get to your accommodation with all your luggage in the first place. If you're flying into Haneda, for instance, the monorail takes you to Hamamatsucho and the Keikyu Line train goes to Shinagawa, so staying in one of those suburbs or close by on the east side of the city may make sense. That also means hopping on a Shinkansen is easy as they depart from Shinagawa and Tokyo Station. I always use apps like Google Maps to work out how easy the commute will be before I settle on an itinerary and book any accommodation. Speaking of your itinerary, I'd recommend building it out so that you're not constantly on the move. With young kids in particular, it's a real hassle to move around with luggage, so don't try and cram too many stops into your stay. The holiday needs to be fun for everyone, so don't feel bad about making it easy on yourself and setting up camp for a few days in each location. Of course, it depends on what you want to get out of the trip, but particularly if your kids have never been to Japan before, there's so much to do in the big cities that you can spend several awesome days in a single city and have the peace of mind that you're coming back to the same accommodation every night. The key part of doing that, of course, is finding a central location in which to stay so that it's easy to get to the places you want to go. Keen to hit up Team Labs, Disneyland, and say Skytree while in Tokyo? The east side of the city is going to be the most convenient. And even if you want to spend a day on the other side of the city in Shibuya or visiting the Ghibli Museum, as a couple of examples, Tokyo's public transport is so good it's still not going to be a huge hassle. Each city is a little different, of course. Kyoto has limited train coverage, so you'll need to use buses a lot more for getting around. With that in mind, you may want to stay near Kyoto Station so you're close to the main public transport hub. If you head to Osaka, on the other hand, you'll probably come into Shin Osaka on the Shinkansen, but that's pretty out of the way and the subway system in the city is excellent, so you're much better off booking accommodation that's closer to the action. But what kind of accommodation can you expect to find in Japan? Well, your choice of hotels may be a bit different going to Japan with kids as opposed to on your own or as a couple. When I travel on my own, for instance, I almost always stay in business hotels. They're everywhere, great value, and I don't really care if my room is a shoebox with a view onto the wall of the adjacent building. Because these hotels are meant to cater to business travellers, however, they have a lot less rooms that will fit families than they do rooms that can accommodate 1 or 2 people. They're also less likely to have baby-friendly options like cots. I also found when searching for family accommodation online that a lot of the options I was presented with were pretty misleading. It was quite surprising how many of the search results seemed to assume that a lone double or queen-sized bed would somehow be enough for myself, my partner, and my 9-year-old, to the point that I reverted to simply searching for rooms for 3 adults after a while. This is something to be very conscious of, so when searching for accommodation, make sure the site you're looking at clearly tells you how many beds there are and how large they'll be. Be particularly wary of anywhere that says kids can stay for free, as there's a reason for that. They probably won't have their own bed. When I'm planning a trip of my own, I generally search for hotels directly through Google Maps, but there's no option in that interface to specify that you have children with you and what their ages are. To enable that functionality, you'll need to head to google.com/travel and click on the Hotels tab. Google's a reasonable enough option for the most part, but you may want to try other aggregators such as TripAdvisor and Hotels Combined. That said, in addition to the hassle of trying to find a realistic set of beds, some aggregate sites also have a tendency to shunt you from aggregator to aggregator. If you're less concerned about squeezing the best possible deal out of your accommodation, there's something to be said for just going straight to the Agodas and Booking.coms of the world, particularly as they incentivize using them with various status and booking rewards. Your budget will partly determine the kinds of hotels you're looking at, but so too will your needs. Do you need a bit more room than a business hotel is likely to provide for multiple suitcases, strollers, and the like? Would you value a view because you're likely to be back at the hotel early in the evening? Do you need laundry facilities, luggage forwarding services? There are a lot of considerations. In addition to hotels, ryokan can be a good option as they'll generally have larger rooms, especially when the futons you sleep on are packed away, and will give your kids more of a taste of Japanese culture. Plus, the fact that you're sleeping on futons means they can scale based on your needs a lot more easily than a traditional hotel. Renting apartments or going through Airbnb can also make sense if you, again, want more space and are interested in using amenities like microwaves, stovetops, and washing machines. I also prioritise hotels with onsen facilities, as for us, a day in Japan isn't complete without a soak. Chains like Dormy Inn are both affordable and often have quite good baths, so we've always got a couple of those in the mix on our trips. Be sure to check out their tattoo policy ahead of time if you're inked up though. Check-in for accommodation in Japan is typically 3 p.m, and hotels will almost never let you into your room before that. Even if it's 2 p.m, they'll go through the check-in process and then tell you that the check-in time is 3 p.m. It's frustrating, but just something you have to accept about traveling in Japan. The key thing is to plan your days around that fact. Hotels are almost always fine to hold your bags before you can check in or after you check out, so take advantage of that to ensure you're not lugging luggage unnecessarily. If you do get caught with your bags, by the way, the lockers at train stations can be a lifesaver, and they have English language instructions too. Lastly, this is an obvious tip, but save hotels and other locations you're planning on visiting or hoping to visit on Google Maps or your map app of choice. That way you don't have to search for them again, as they'll already be visible on the map. Doing this ahead of time will also ensure you've got the right location. Plenty of hotel chains have multiple hotels in the same city with very similar names. You don't want to rock up to the wrong one. Okay, so that was accommodation. Let's move on to 10 tips for one of Japan's most spectacular assets. It's food. Japan has a ridiculous array of food that it does incredibly well. This obviously includes the full spectrum of Japanese cuisine, but it also extends to food from around the globe. To quote Mr. Baseball, the Tom Selleck classic,
Japan takes the best from all over the world and makes it her own.
This means that regardless of whether you want sushi or steak, you're in business.
This is good.
Kobe beef, fed with beer, massaged by hand.
Oh, should have signed up to be a cow here instead of a ball player.
That said, as far as I'm concerned, eating Japanese cuisine is one of the main draws of travelling to Japan. So if food is going to be a focus, it's a good idea to try and ensure the whole family is on the same page. This leads me to tip number 1. If your kids haven't eaten a lot of Japanese food, I'd recommend getting them started well ahead of the trip. Not only will this help acclimatise them to some of the staples of Japanese cuisine, but it will also give you a reliable baseline to fall back on without having to resort to the likes of Macca's. And if it means that you have to eat more Japanese food before the trip, well, that's just something you'll have to endure. Before our first family trip to Japan, for instance, my kid was already into udon, sushi, karaage chicken and tonkatsu, so that gave us a great starting point. And from there, it was only a short leap to eating things like ramen, onigiri, yakitori, yakiniku, gyoza, kushikatsu, okonomiyaki, shabu-shabu and Japanese curry, which isn't at all hot incidentally, unless you order it that way. Getting my son into famichiki, the holy grail of fast food that will absolutely kill you but at least you'll die happy, wasn't a hard sell either. He's such a fan of Japanese food these days that he usually goes over with a wish list of things he wants to eat, and we check them off as we go along. You want an egg sando with a famichiki inside? I guess sometimes 2 rights just make an even bigger right.
Good combo.
Yeah? Did you get some famichiki? Amazing.
Let's move on to the next tip. If you're on a budget, and even if you're not, lunch specials are your friend. Lots of restaurants do these, offering up set meal choices that are both filling and excellent value. A lunch special will set the family up for the rest of the day, letting you potentially just have something light for dinner later on. Chain restaurants are a great fallback for family meals as they're reliable and consistent. Once you've been to yakitori chain Torikizoku once, for instance, you know the options they have, how much things cost, and how to order using their tablets. There are heaps of restaurant chains in Japan that you can lean on, from more focused options like Tonkatsu Mason, Ichiran, Sushiro, and Yoshinoya, through to the broader menus of family restaurants like Gusto and Denny's. Many of the latter have menus with a mix of Western and Japanese food and tend to be extremely affordable too. Also, robots. If there's a particular type of cuisine you're after, do some Googling and see what chains are out there, as it might be the easiest option. Pubs aren't a staple part of life in Japan in the same way they are in most Western countries, but that's because izakayas fill that role in their own inimitable way. Izakayas are informal bars that also have a variety of small dishes on the menu. They're fun places to go and can be a good choice if you need to cater to disparate tastes, as their menus typically encompass everything from karaage chicken, gyoza and yakitori, through to Western fare like French fries and occasionally dishes like pizza. Some will be more family friendly than others, but a good option is rarely far away. If you're not sure what you want to eat, a solid option is to head to the restaurant floors that are typically housed above department stores. They're great because there are heaps of restaurants to choose from, and you can simply walk around and see what's on offer. The plastic meal displays are a huge help in working out what different restaurants specialise in too. Not only are there usually restaurant floors above department stores, but there are often ridiculously vast arrays of food stalls in the basement levels too, so you can wander about and pick stuff up individually. You'll need to find somewhere to eat it, however. It's also worth pointing out that the standard of food in Japan is uniformly high, so if the kids are grumbling, you can pretty much pick any hole-in-the-wall restaurant and get something tasty. Even the most unassuming places will serve up a decent meal, so sometimes the lowest effort option will be just fine. Speaking of unassuming places, plenty of these will have vending machines out the front or just inside the door that you use to place and pay for your order. More modern machines will have touchscreens and the option to change the language to English, but even if you're using an old school one with physical buttons, there's no need to be intimidated, even if all the choices are in Japanese. For a start, Google Translate can give you a real-time idea of what the options are, as can the pictures if there are any, and if in doubt, the choice at the top left is generally the recommended one, or at least the most popular dish. The main things to bear in mind are that you'll almost always need cash to use these machines, and don't forget that you can also order things like extra toppings, side dishes, and drinks. It's easy to get flustered and feel rushed when making your selections, particularly if there's a queue, but a few extra seconds to make sure you've got everything covered isn't a problem. Just place your order, press the change button if there is one, and hand the tickets to the staff when you see them. Convenience stores, aka konbinis, are a surprisingly good option when it comes to food and drink. Not only are they everywhere, but they stock a wide range of fresh food that's replaced daily. From snacks like onigiri and sandwiches through to full meals, which can even be heated up on the spot. You can also get chips, chocolate, cup noodles, a wide array of drinks, and more. If your kids are picky eaters or have dietary restrictions for one reason or another, konbinis can save a heap of hassle. Speaking of picky eaters, hotel breakfasts can be a bit on the funky side in Japan. And no, not the good kind of funk. Oh yeah. I'm talking more about seemingly random selections of food that'll have you scratching your head as to how you're going to eke a satisfying breakfast out of the choices on offer. Obviously, bigger places and more upmarket hotels usually have quite wide selections, so chances are you'll all find something you want to eat at those. Smaller establishments, on the other hand, are much more of a dice roll. And even if the selection is good for a Japanese person, if your kids aren't used to eating rice, miso, pickles, cured fish and the like for breakfast, it may be a big swing and a miss. Personally, I generally opt to save the money and just grab food for everyone from the nearest konbini. If you have vegans or vegetarians with you, you'll need to do more research when deciding on restaurants. One useful tip is to ask your ryokan host or hotel concierge for recommendations. They'll be happy to make bookings for you too. Other than that, Google Translate or a similar app can help lower the language barrier, so whether you're browsing a menu in a restaurant or the aisles in a konbini, technology is your friend. Those are my primary pointers for painless family feasts in Japan, but before we move on, I have 7 bonus tips related to food that I think you should also know. While families are welcome in most restaurants, some are definitely better suited to a family meal than others. If you see a standing ramen bar, for instance, the expectation is that you'll order and eat quickly, then be on your way. Anywhere with extremely limited seating that clearly wants to get customers through at speed is a bad choice if you have really young kids or if you just want to take a breath while eating a meal. Most restaurants will be able to rustle up a fork or a spoon if asked.
I see you've played knifey spoony before.
But if your kids are old enough, you may want to try and get them using chopsticks before you go over. You could also buy training chopsticks to bring with you, or a portable set of kids' utensils so you never need to ask. We always take games like Uno as well as colouring in books and activity books to help bridge long train journeys or waits in restaurants. Also as a futile attempt to reduce screen time at night. It rarely works, but hey, it's worth a shot. Need a high chair? You'll generally be able to get one in places like department store restaurants, family restaurants, and most chain restaurants. Smaller places like tiny izakaya or ramen shops that only have stools are unlikely to be able to hook you up, however. Just ask at the door. Konbinis in Japan are unbelievably useful for food, but they do have some blind spots in other areas. Need nappies? Or sunscreen? Or painkillers? While those items are sometimes available, it's far more likely that you'll need to go to a pharmacy or large supermarket. That said, one thing you can rely on is for convenies to have rubbish bins. You pretty much won't see bins on the streets, so if you want to get rid of rubbish or recycle a bottle, your best bet is to pop into a convenie. The bins are usually just inside the door. While there are conveni everywhere, Japanese people generally don't eat while moving around in public. If you're desperate, many conveni have eating areas, usually just a narrow table or two and seats, or you can stand outside the store and eat before moving on. It's also fine to stand by a vending machine if you want a drink. Eating and drinking on trains is generally a no-go too, with key exceptions like the Shinkansen, aka the Drinkansen. It can be fun to teach your kids a few basic Japanese words and phrases before you go over. And you should definitely have some vocab related to food in the mix, as it will most definitely come in handy. My suggestions? If you can get your kids saying oishi or oishikata and gochiso sama deshita as you leave a restaurant, you'll be star clientele. So those are my tips for eating well with the kids in the land of the rising yum. Let's move on to advice for planning out your activities. When it comes to how you spend your days in Japan, there are a mind-boggling number of options. From temples and shrines to amusement parks, game arcades, themed cafes, toy stores and dense shopping districts, there's something for everyone. If you're there at the right time of year, you can even plan your days around cherry blossoms or autumn foliage, not to mention seasonal sports like baseball games and sumo tournaments. In general though, I think finding ways to take advantage of your kids' interests is key to having a good holiday. Japan really is a pop culture juggernaut, so if they're into Pokemon, manga/anime such as One Piece, video game franchises like Mario, Zelda and Final Fantasy, or other Japanese titans like Godzilla and Hello Kitty, name a more iconic duo, then you'll already have some stuff to target while you're over there. Many Japanese cities have otaku districts with geeky shops, arcades and more, so if you're in Tokyo for instance, you can head to Akihabara or Nakano Broadway and check out dozens of stores selling new and secondhand games, merch, manga and more.
Welcome to Nakano Broadway! Let's go!
That said, there are more options outside those districts than ever before. The big electronics stores like Big Camera and Yodobashi have plenty to offer, while there are brand-specific options like pocket centers and One Piece shops all over the place. Tokyo and Osaka both have Nintendo stores too, while game arcades aren't too hard to find either. Regardless of the Japanese property your kids are into, chances are there'll be places you can visit to take advantage of that interest. Whether those are shops, themed cafes, amusement parks, or statues large and small. Your kids love Godzilla? Well, there's a chain of stores selling Godzilla merch. Plus you can spot him in Shinjuku and maybe even zip line into his gaping maw on Awaji Island. Where's that? Just near Naruto. Naruto the city, that is, not the character. Although it's also close to the Naruto attraction. Your activities don't have to be based around Japanese properties either. Do your kids love Harry Potter? If so, then Universal Studios Japan in Osaka or the Making of Harry Potter studio tour in Tokyo might be worth a look.
Wizarding World of Harry Potter.
Are they into Disney, Pixar or Star Wars? Disneyland and Disney Sea might be the go. For theme parks, you'll want to plan ahead. They tend to be quietest midweek, and by quietest I mean bearably packed, so try to engineer your weeks around going on the slowest days. And before you book, make sure there aren't public holidays, school holidays or anything else that might cause a spike in attendance. Research is everything, so you should also look into the busiest and best rides so you can beeline for them when the gates open. Most theme parks also have an app, and while they're not without their issues, it's helpful to have an interactive map and to be able to see how long queues are in real time. They have additional functionality too. At the Disney parks, for instance, you can book spots for shows and the like using the app. The system is quite limited, so look into it ahead of time to make the most of it. Fast passes can also be crucial for making the most of your amusement park experiences. At Disney Sea, we wound up paying for fast passes midway through the day just to dodge the queues on a couple of rides and get more stuff in. Universal Studios Japan works a little differently with a somewhat confusing range of packages you can choose from on top of your actual entry tickets. As we're big Nintendo and Harry Potter fans, we bought a package that included timed entry to both Super Nintendo World and the Harry Potter area, as well as the ability to skip the queue for a ride in each. Our choice also included fast passes we could use on a handful of other rides. My son was surprisingly fine queuing in both parks, but by the end of the day, the queues for the best rides can be nudging towards 2 hours long, so sprinkling in some quick fixes along the way means you get to do more and you're more likely to keep everyone happy. It's also worth pointing out that you may have trouble buying tickets for theme parks through the official channels. Tokyo Disney Sea's site simply wouldn't accept any of my credit cards, for instance, and this is a pretty common problem. We wound up buying our tickets through Klook. Also be sure to check whether your kids are tall enough to ride everything before you book. You really don't want to miss the flying dinosaur because your damn wiener kids are too small. And as a general rule, Disneyland is best with young kids, whereas I'd wait to visit Disney Sea and USJ until my kids can go on all the rides. And once you've done those parks, it's time to graduate to Fuji Q Highland. Just as I recommended getting your kids into Japanese food before the trip, the same can be true of other aspects of Japanese culture. If your children haven't seen Totoro or the other kid-friendly Studio Ghibli classics, those characters are everywhere in Japan, so it's worth getting the family up to speed. Speaking of Studio Ghibli, the merch shops are everywhere now, but if you're hoping to visit the Ghibli Museum or Ghibli Park, you'll definitely need to get those tickets well in advance. That goes for plenty of activities, incidentally. Lots of locations sell out ahead of time, so if you're doing Disney or tackling Team Lab, get your tickets as far in advance as possible. You're probably fine to buy tickets for things like Skytree or Tokyo Tower on the day, but I'd still try and book ahead as you may be able to find a better price online, particularly if you're looking to book a handful of activities and thus may be able to get a package discount. One overall piece of advice I have is to be realistic about what makes sense for your kids. When my son was younger, for instance, we definitely catered our itineraries more specifically to keeping him happy, which meant more amusement parks and less museums, more merch and less temples, more chilling and less walking. Now that he's a bit older, however, it's more of a mix as we try to get him into the stuff we like to do in Japan. He might not have particularly wanted to hike up Mount Kintoki and Hakone for a view of Mount Fuji, but the promise of a mochi at the top, followed by a meal of his choice when he got back down, gave him something to look forward to. Context can be invaluable too, so in the instance of Kintoki, I told him the folktale of the super strong Kintaro, who was supposedly raised by a witch on the very mountain we were climbing. That way, when we saw the boulder Kintaro supposedly broke in two, and then when we found an enormous axe on the summit, much like the one he was said to have carried around, it all made more sense. Obviously, your mileage will vary, as my son's eyes tend to glaze over whenever I start talking about how amazing it is that a temple has been around for 1,000 years. But still, context will help them get more out of the trip in general, and it's a good excuse for you to dive into researching your destinations a little more too. There's some fun supernatural aspects of Japanese culture you can all learn about together as well, such as yokai and animism. I mean, who doesn't want to know about how kappa love cucumbers, or how there's that weird umbrella yokai? Or you can dig into some of the more fearsome looking creatures like Oni and Tengu. Choosing manageable, age-appropriate activities is everything. You're not going to want to climb Kintoki if you have to lug a stroller and carry a child the entire way, for instance. Instead, maybe you're better off hitting a toy store, finding a playground, or petting some adorable miniature pigs. Hello. You may also want to involve your children in the planning stages ahead of the trip, telling them about some of the options so they can build out a list of stuff they'd like to do. That way, when you're there, they can pick stuff from their list, perhaps even choosing between a couple of options, so they have a little agency in what's happening each day. And if you don't want your kids badgering you to buy stuff for them constantly, you could think about giving them a daily allowance that they can choose to spend however they like. That way, they have to decide what they really want. Do they want to spend money on UFO catchers, gachapon, gaming arcades, merch, figurines, vending machines, Famicom, or Famichiki? Here are a handful of other tips to bear in mind. This is a bit counterintuitive, given I've said you should get your kids interested in Japanese food and culture ahead of the trip, but it's also a bit dangerous to hype it up too much. If you're like, Tokyo is the craziest, busiest city in the world, or Japanese game arcades are like nothing you've ever seen, you run the risk of setting dangerously high expectations. Better to underpromise and overdeliver. A good way to help ensure your kids actually remember more of the holiday is to either have them write a daily journal if they're old enough, or do some kind of family recap at the end of the day, covering off the stuff that everyone liked most or perhaps even disliked.
It seems like you're not taking this seriously.
What makes you say that?
That's a good time to go over the plan for the following day too. You can also get your kids to write postcards to send back home to family and friends. Sure, they probably won't arrive until after you're back, but that's not really the point. If you need a bathroom, obvious options are train stations and department stores, but most konbini also have bathrooms that customers can use. Just be sure to buy something if you do that. You can also use konbinis as the easiest source of a snack, meal, or drink. And lastly, don't try to cram too much in. Tired kids are grumpy kids. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the awesome Japan travel content I have coming up. And most importantly, have a great trip.
Why, that was elegant. Very elegant indeed.